think we have about 5 minutes if you have any question or any concern or share or ask too. Oh. No, I want to ask.
I'm supposed to be someplace else.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay. Thank you so much again. And okay, I do.
My question is, in terms, now, see, I'm a third generation in this country, my grandkids are fifth generation in this country, and as that evolves and as the demographics of this country are changing, faster than we can deal with our heads and our history, do you see, are there avenues that are kind of different or things to look at that we might be growing into the country, the demographic, the society, the church of the future?
That's a great question. The question is like a generational question. What do we have? What do we do when we get to the second and third and fourth generation? I think that actually is the hope for what multi-ethnicity can look like in America. I think some of the best writing that have been done has actually come from the Latino community. Elizondo from San Antonio and Villafane from Bogotá have done some really good work reflecting. Villafane, I think he takes this from Elizondo, but he takes it a little further, uses the concept triple consciousness. And triple consciousness is the building upon W.B. Du Bois's concept of double consciousness. Those of you familiar with Du Bois's work, Du Bois says that the African American has this double consciousness, developing this dual identity of living in majority white culture, but interacting and feeling more at home in kind of the black community. So the African American goes into the majority white culture, dresses a certain way, speaks a certain way, eats certain foods, because we're trying to adapt to the majority culture. But comes back to the home community, the black neighborhood, the black church, dresses differently, speaks differently, the food's different. So you're accommodating these kind of two different worlds, and you develop a double consciousness. This is Du Bois analysis. The best pop cultural expression of this is a movie called Undercover Brother. Don't watch it, but it actually is. You know what I'm talking about, right? So it's actually one of the movies that kind of talk about this dual identity of being in the majority white world, but also within the context of African American culture. Villafane picks on this and says, this is actually very true for English-speaking second-generation Puerto Rican Americans. Very specific analysis. But he says, if you're an English-speaking Puerto Rican American, second-generation Puerto Rican American, you are familiar, you have a triple consciousness. Because you're familiar with majority white culture, you're living in majority white culture, act, dress, eat certain way. And then you also go back to your parents' immigrant church. And you're familiar with that culture as well, because you know, as a Korean, for example, you know you're going to have kimchi at the lunch meals. You know you're going to have tteokbokki on New Year's. You're familiar with the songs that you sing and the words that you say. So, but at the same time, you're both an insider and outsider to both of those cultures. So Villafane says that by the second and third generation, you develop a triple consciousness, a third level of understanding that incorporates both of these, but as a new identity of its own. And so this triple consciousness, and Elizondo has a really new book, interesting new book called The Future is Mestizo. And that again is where the Latino community can inform us about what does it mean for us to be multicultural in our experience. The further down you go, third, fourth, fifth generation, now you're operating in these multicultural realities even for yourself. So your parents might be first generation Korean American, and you know that world, but that's not really your world. Your education and your schooling might be very steeped in white American culture, so you know that world, but you don't quite feel at home in that world. So you create an identity, a consciousness, or a culture that is neither those two things, but a new cultural identity in and of itself, this kind of triple consciousness. We're seeing that all over, regardless of the communities, right? You can say this about the Puerto Rican community, but you can definitely say this about the Korean community, the Chinese community, Samoan communities, Hawaiian communities. You can say it about almost every generational, intergenerational community that a new identity starts getting formed that draws from these multiple identities. And the question that I'm grappling with is, the hypothetical question is, can triple consciousness, second generation folk, develop a community based upon that commonality. So even though your country of origin is different, there's a connection that a second generation Latino has with a second generation Asian American, because we still had a similar experience, even though our culture of origin is extraordinarily different. So why do Jose and I get along? Because we're both second generation in some sense, right? We have this triple consciousness identity.
I resonate very much with all of the things that you're saying. I want to look down to the future, farther, where this country, whatever that dominant culture that we're talking about now, how is that going to change? The gifts that we all bring to it, I mean, it's not the dominant culture in my ethnic culture, but that somehow all of that has to get stirred together, and that whatever, I mean, there may not be a dominant culture that, as we understand it now.
Right. Well, I'll use this illustration. I hope it's helpful. And that's an excellent point. How do we start contributing and changing that? So the common illustration of a multi-ethnic America has been, the first illustration has been the melting pot. We're all familiar with the melting pot, right? If you ever watch Schoolhouse Rock, you remember all the different cultures coming in, they melt away all the differences, and you get cream of mushroom. And so you get this one bland culture because all the culture has been melted away. Now that's not an image that I want. I don't want to be melted away. I have a Native American theologian friend of mine who says, we natives don't melt very well, so please don't keep trying to melt us. So the idea of melting away culture doesn't work. So the second illustration that came up was the salad bowl illustration. You know, the salad bowl, right? You get all these different vegetables, you throw them into a bowl. But what happened with all those vegetables? You might have jalapenos and Napa cabbage and you know, romaine lettuce. You might have all these different cultural vegetables, but you drenched it with creamy ranch. So everything starts tasting like creamy ranch, no matter how flavorful that vegetable might be, it still tastes like creamy ranch. So that's often what we do with culture as well. We get all these different faces that look different, but we drench them with creamy ranch so that everybody tastes like creamy ranch. So that's an approach that I would also have struggled with. I'm not sure what the third image would be, but I would hope that it is an image of where these voices are not lost. These cultures are not lost. And this goes again to the image of God. Maybe this image is helpful. Stand in Your Way is a Japanese American theologian who talks about the image of God is a mirror that you stand in front of. And then when the fall happens, the image falls to the ground and is shattered into thousands of different pieces. And there are all these broken pieces on the ground. And so the goal is to restore the image of God. And you have to do two things. The first is to clean up your piece of the mirror because it fell on the ground. It's fallen. It's broken. But then the second thing is you have to bring these pieces of the mirror together. And some of us are called to clean up our piece of the mirror because, you know, our culture is fallen. It's made in the image of God. It still can reflect it, but it's still fallen. And so we need to make sure that image is cleaned up, is polished up. But then we also need to bring these pieces of the glass together. And I think that's sometimes the work that we've been called to bring the pieces of glass together. And the warning is, if you ever play with broken glass on the edges, you're going to get cut. And I think for us, we have to be ready to get cut because it's part of the restoring of the image of God and through the church. And so how can we be about both ends? Polishing our piece of the mirror so that we're more accurately reflecting who God is within our culture, but also bringing these broken pieces of the mirror together.
Okay, if you still have any questions, please talk to him. I think he will be around. How long?